Hi, everybody.
Hey, how are you doing?
Yeah,
Hello.
very
Hi.
good. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we've got everyone everywhere. How is everybody?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks.
Really the sun is out, so feeling good today.
Yeah, exactly. The sun is here. Perfect. We're just waiting. I think that's everybody. Oscar's
That's
got
our youngest participant then.
Our youngest participant. Learning about circular economy young. I love it.
Learning early, I like it.
Oh, that's what we're doing it for, right? The next generation.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, that's amazing. I love it. Thank you all so much for joining. I think there might be another couple of people invited, but obviously we'll just let them in as and when. So yeah, thanks everybody. Happy Earth Day to everyone. I think this is our first official green room, so thank you so much for coming. I hope you all find it an interesting event. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just introduce Storm 4 for anyone that I know. Obviously I've met some of you before, I haven't met others, so I'm going to introduce Storm 4 and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the green room and why we created it. And then I thought we could do some introductions, just, people could kind of, say who they are and the experience they've had with circular economy, where in the world you are, and anything you want to share. And then we'll kind of dive into the discussions. So Storm 4, for those of you who don't know, we are a green tech recruitment specialist, and we partner with companies all across the world that basically are using technology to drive sustainability. And the reason that we started Storm 4 was that we really saw a gap in the market in regards to green tech companies are so passionate about what they're doing, and we're very passionate about the space. And we really thought that that the industry really needed a partner that wanted and shared their vision. And that was why we created Storm 4, to partner with green tech companies and really help the space grow. The green room was basically when we founded the company, which it only officially launched this year. I was sitting with my fiance and we were talking about lots of things, the design of the website and colors we wanted to use. And I was saying that I'd love to create a forum, where people within the green tech space and specifically within the different industries, so circular economy, future mobility, could get together with their peers, people that they'd probably never come across in any other forum, and could just share ideas and collaborate and come up with tips or share challenges. And he kind of laughed and was like, oh, you should call it the green room, because obviously that's where actors go to kind of chill out and have relaxed conversations before they go on stage. And obviously with it being the green tech, I thought that was a great idea, and I stole it off him. So he loves that this event is happening. He's like, my dreams are becoming a reality. So this is the first event. I really hope you find it rewarding. We are recording this event, and I hope you don't mind. It will not be used externally. As you can see, the three blank Storm 4 squares there are actually our marketing division. And what they're going to do, they've attended a few events on circular economy and done some research, and then they're going to use some of the insights from this event, and they're going to create a white paper, which obviously we'll be sharing on the website, and we will send individually to you. So there'll be hopefully some really rich insights and valuable outcomes that are in that white paper. So yeah, the recording will not be going anywhere. It will literally be for them to make sure that they've taken down all the notes correctly, and then it will be deleted. So I hope that's okay with everybody. So let's kick off with the introductions. I've written the names down in no particular order, so apologies if you're first, and John, it is you. So if you just want to, you knew it would be.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you just want to introduce yourself, where you're from, kind of your experience with circular economy, and anything else that you want to share.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kate. Good morning, everyone. That's morning. So I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm a Brit. I've been over here for 11 years. Before that, spent 5 years working in Germany. I'm originally from Sheffield in the UK. My real experience has been within the paper industry throughout my career, principally recycling. And my last gig that I've just left was trying to get a startup going over here in the States, based in California. really trying to get a marketplace, a digital marketplace going for the sale of recovered paper. It was a company called Mercubiz. Sadly, it's no longer with us. But the learnings really of trying to get a digital business going on within a circular economy, particularly a very intransparent market. Recovered paper, notoriously globally, I think is one of the most intransparent markets I've ever come across. And trying to get that to raise transparency on issues like quality, data analytics, all the way through the supply chain was the latest challenge that I was with up until February of this year. Happy to be here, delighted to be here, looking forward to the discussion. I think one of the things that I really want to get out of being with a group like this today is understanding the mechanics of how to get business in the circular economy up and running. Successful business using digital products that really become viable and therefore encourage further growth and further take up of circular economy topics. So there we go, Kay. That was the start of the 10. I'll pass back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate that. Yvonne, if you could go next, that'd be brilliant.
Sure. Yvonne, based out of Haarlem, the Netherlands. So it's afternoon here, around 5:30. The sun is still out, so I finally feel spring is really around the corner. Back in the Netherlands now after 7 years in Singapore, where I co-founded a fintech startup with 3 other Dutchies, and launched a comparison website across 7 countries in Asia. Came back to the Netherlands to find a higher purpose in the work that I'm doing after 26 years of startup life. After about a year, found that circular economy is the subject that I want to contribute to. Joined Circular Economy, a social enterprise based out of the Netherlands, but working on global scale. Joined them a couple of months ago and drafted their digital strategy, and joined the team full-time last month to actually build out a platform for the target audience being nations, cities, and businesses to support them in their transition to circular economy. Very exciting. Logically, as a social enterprise, it's not a for-profit model, but it has a business model in it, so at least it will be self-sustaining moving forward. I think the first 2 years, for sure, will have to be funded through trusts and foundations to just get it off the ground. But what I'm looking to share with you guys here is my experiences in that whole process, but also try and stay connected with some of you throughout this journey where we're building out the platform and looking to release it in Q4 this year.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Yvonne. Alan, if we could hear from you next, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to see everybody. I'm in Glasgow, so the city of permanent winter, but the sun is actually shining outside, which is a rarity. So I'm loving being stuck inside on a day like this.
Sorry.
No, don't worry about it. I blame my employer. Well, in terms of my involvement for today, I work for a circular economy consultancy called Resource Futures. So my day job is advising businesses on how to be more circular, from startups to well-established companies who are linear and trying to make the jump in the conversion. With a second hat on, I'm involved in a company who has launched its first digital product for the construction sector, and the product is called constructionwasteportal.com, and it's essentially trying to give transparency to the construction industry and how you generate forecasts of waste, and then also tap into the waste industry to get the best quality of waste management solution. So kind of bringing a compare the meerkat type model, although trademarked, it's not that, to a construction waste issue, which when we look at the amount of waste that is generated from the construction sector, it's enormous, and there's a huge amount of money being lost in the system by people doing this. to get a financial estimate or an environmental estimate and how much waste they're going to produce. So what we're trying to do is build a data set of over 900 projects to give a more robust algorithm that spits out a forecast for people, that allows clients to know, contractors to know, and the public to know how much waste is going to get produced on a project, and not to just view a skip on a project, on a construction site, as acceptable, which I think is part of the problem that we have. So I've got two hats on, and I'm happy to contribute with both hats on today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. I'll come to you next, Martin.
Brilliant, thank you. Martin Townsend, Global Head of Sustainability and Circular Economy at BSI. BSI kind of entered in this debate many years ago. We wrote the first circularity standard, BS 8001, in 2017, I think it was. And since then, we've been doing a lot of work with different sectors, I suppose, around what does circularity mean. So if I look at my calendar for this week, we've had lots of conversations with aerospace industry in terms of what does circularity mean for them. They're making some big decisions in their future, and they're starting to use fairly advanced materials and moving away from aluminium. But as they move away from aluminium, they have a problem then in terms of remaking and reusing those types of materials because they're very high tech. Much the same for the automotive industry. But we're doing a lot of work now with the computer industry in terms of looking at how we can design computer technology that can be repurposed, reconditioned, and understanding what does that look like in terms of good design. And equally, as has been mentioned by Alan, I suppose, lots of work in the construction sector. And in that space, we're starting to apply AI to our standards. So we're taking machine readable standards, applying AI to understand how you can drive circularity in terms of efficiency of supply chains, but also what does that mean in terms of productivity, and how do we actually drive that change in a much more digital age?
Amazing. Yes, it's super interesting, and I'm sure that will come up as a big topic. Finally, from an introduction point of view from attendees, and then I'll let Alex, my commercial director, introduce himself. But finally, Oscar, and potentially Oscar's little
here.
one.
Yeah, and my son is also here. So,
hello.
Start to say that my daughter is sick, so that's why he's here. But I hope it's gonna be fine.
Of course.
And I just connected with UK less than 1 week ago, I think. So I'm interested to see what this is all about, Storm 4, and very nice to see you all. It feels like we have a lot in common regarding circular economy. I'm a consultant working in Sweden in design and engineering, and I come from a similar background like John, I think, from waste management and recycling business, where I worked for many years.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Oscar. I'm excited to hear your and his input later on. And also I forgot about you, David. Sorry, you were on a different screen, but I've opened you up now, and Yvonne very kindly reminded me. If you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So it looks like we have a group of people from all over the map. I myself come from all over the place. I was born in Canada, grew up as a child in Texas, as a teenager in the Netherlands. So I did not live in Haarlem. I lived in a town called Wassenaar, which you probably know. Yeah. And went to a British school while there. So I did my GCSEs and A levels there, then studied in the UK. Studied in Canada, then the UK for postgraduate studies, and then moved to Denmark, where I worked for Siemens Wind Power, and was there for a few years, then transitioned into a role where I was doing consulting in emerging technologies, mostly around renewable energies, advanced materials, and battery technology. From there, I joined a startup in Boston that was spun out of MIT developing what's called a liquid metal battery, so a stationary storage technology to help smooth out, basically be the grid scale storage solution for renewables. And from there, I was recruited by Tesla, where I joined the Gigafactory team and was put in charge of figuring out how Tesla would source its raw materials, and to figure out, so it was partly a procurement role, but more dominantly a bigger question role where, just asking and answering the question whether it makes sense for Tesla to vertically integrate, with the purpose of, being a circular system. And, whether it made sense to go buy mines and build gigafactories on top of them. And if so, what are the processes for which, and the refining technologies for which could be brought to the table that could lend itself to recycling. And then from there, I actually moved upstream and joined a lithium mining company for a while. And right now I wear two hats. One is I provide advisory consulting services into the supply chain of mostly battery materials, but I work really at the interface between mining, energy, and technology. And the other hat I wear is I'm a part-time operating partner at a private equity firm that is specifically investing in and looking for opportunities in the in the circular economy space, in hydrogen, in battery materials, waste to fuels, things like that. So
good stuff. Thanks for that, David. We lost Kate, and I think her computer's just died. The joy of live events, but she's frantically texting me saying, I'm logging back on. So she'll be back in a minute. So just while she's getting that sorted out, I'll introduce. So I'm here, a little bit of imposter, to be honest with you. So as Kay mentioned, I lead the commercial offering for the group of businesses, which is Storm 2, 3, 4, and 5. FinTech, health tech, green tech, and retail tech. So obviously this is more Storm 4. So yeah, that involves dealing with our clients in terms of sort of the offering that we can do and how we can help them sort of in their human capital growth. So yeah, the green tech space is incredibly interesting at the moment. I think we're also finding interestingly that our FinTech clients are sort of saying, oh, what's this green tech thing you're doing? And is there something that we can partner with you on? Because we're thinking about how we can try and make a difference in the ways that we do things and investments, etc. So it's a really interesting space to be in. So I'm certainly really fascinated to hear what you guys are going to be covering off. And it looks like Kay is back in the game, which was good timing.
Yeah, it wouldn't be one of these events, would it, with technology, if your computer didn't suddenly just turn off midway through. But yeah, I'm back, and thank you for carrying on, Alex. And no David, I heard most of your story, but I'll catch up on the end at some point. So yeah, let's thank you so much for all of the introductions. Really interesting. I think we've got a really great group of people here to have some really interesting conversations around this subject. I'm here, and probably like Alex mentioned, as a host. I am so interested in the subject, and obviously green tech is a huge passion of mine, but really I'm here to kind of ask questions and facilitate the conversation. But really the reason that the Green Room was created was to have a relaxed environment where peers could really share ideas and challenges and tips, and that's what I wanted to create. So I'm going to try and not stand in the way of that. I've got some questions that have come in from some of you guys, and I've got some questions that I think could start some good dialogue. But obviously this is about the conversation flowing, so I'm not going to interrupt if there's some really great conversations happening. But I am here if a conversation or a question has been answered, then I've got some kind of good topics. So let's start with some of the attendee questions, because obviously it's important that we kind of get those out, and they'll probably fuel some great follow-ups. So one of the questions that I think is really interesting is, how do we overcome barriers such as procurement and client apathy in regards to circular economy? And feel free to just dive in and tackle that, or ask additional questions and things like that.
I think a lot of this is around education, isn't it? We had a BSI had a webinar this morning about circularity. And it was really interesting because we invited a number of people from procurement on the call. And I think their attitude is changing, because some of the case studies that come into the surface now, that if you start to think about some of the principles about circularity in terms of remaking, repurposing, there is a misunderstanding that a product that is reused, a product that is remade, is not as good as the original. And actually what is really interesting is the feedback that some of the products that are being put through the process of circularity and being repurposed are actually better than the originals. Because what you find is that actually when you understand a product and how it's performing and how it's failing, you can actually upgrade that component. And if it's an organization, they can that back to the original product manufacturer. And I think what came out of the conversation this morning is that actually there's a changing understanding in that process. And if we then look to future generations, so really good demonstration, I can't remember who had their children with them today, but if you look at Generation X and Generation Z, they are wedded to values and brands, and those brands and values will change the behavior. So effectively, they will pick products and pick services that align to their beliefs in terms of what a sustainable future looks like. So I think we're in this process of transition from current barriers and perceptions to future barriers and perceptions.
And leading up to defining what features we need to develop in the product, we spoke to different potential users. So we separated that between global north, global south. We looked at businesses, cities and nations, and local NGOs. And what we found is that the hesitation also stems from on top of education, which I completely agree with Martin. On top of that, it's also that it's still a fairly new concept, circular economy, and they want to relate it back to themes that they're more familiar about, whether it is climate or whether it's emissions or jobs. So if circular economy initiatives and strategies can be related to themes that they are more familiar with, then they're inclined to engage a lot sooner. But also it makes it possible for them to then engage their stakeholders and request funding or get the hands together to actually work on these different strategies rather than just calling it circular economy. And that's something that definitely it takes time and education, but it also takes, it's a challenge for us to make sure that whatever we do, we relate it back to themes that people are just more comfortable with, more familiar with.
Yeah,
it's an interesting point you raised there, though, isn't it? Is it a new concept? Because if you go back in history, generations, but I mean, my grandparents used to recycle, reuse products. If you look at, various products used to have a deposit on them that you got that deposit back when you returned it back to the shop. I think we're rediscovering things that we've forgotten in circularity.
100%. It's just that the decision makers that are in the roles that are the change makers today are less familiar with that, and it's the term that might be new, but it's not the concept that's new. I completely agree. It's not the concept. It's really calling it circular economy and moving away from linear. When you explain it, no one doesn't understand, right? Everyone understands, but it's just if you call it the circular economy initiative, the circular economy strategy, we need to work towards the circular economy. It for some out there, it's still abstract. They don't know how to load the term.
Yeah.
I think
it becomes a placeholder. Yeah.
I think the education is one part. I think the generation change is a huge part. I've got two teenage girls, and circular economy topics to them is huge compared to when I was a teenager, which I do sort of remember in the past. But this is a huge issue, and it's what they're doing in all the social media. My 15-year-old almost daily is piling on posts related to the environment, circular economy related topics on her Instagram to her friends, and that's the way that she has grown up, and that's within her education. So that's the social media aspect going in. But I'd like to draw it back maybe to the mention on procurement, and procurement is a big part of this. They are the decision makers in many companies. They're driving the supply chain. And for me, for the procurement guys, education is one thing, sure, but data is the big thing. With data, transparency comes in. You can't hide from the data. And from recent experience on the recycling side, where you're working with a group of people in procurement that have run their businesses for many, many years successfully on relationships. You know, I buy and I sell to this guy and from this guy because I've worked with him for 10, 15, 20 years. I know his family, I know their birthdays, etc. That's the way business was done. Then suddenly someone comes in with technology and data and shines a light and says, actually, there's a better way of doing it. First of all, there is a threat. That procurement person feels as a threat to their job, to their existence. And you've got to overcome that. And that's partly education, but also comfort that the data in driving circular economy topics does not necessarily have to disrupt people's lives in the way that they see it as a negative. But it's something that can be enhanced to actually make the business more profitable, make it more successful, and also drag on with that the acceptance that the circular economy and running a circular economy in a profitable way is possible, and there is nothing to be scared of. And I think procurement guys are a group of people that have to be encouraged and have to be led, partly with education, but also comfort with use of things like data analytics, where it's actually seen as a benefit to them, and therefore that can drive the topics. And I say I'm going on recycling, mainly recycling commodities, but makes acceptance of enhanced use of those and more profitable use of those more acceptable.
It's interesting that you say that, John, because numbers don't lie. But what I found, if there's not a standard, and I'm probably talking, you know, in Martin's category, but if there isn't a standard, then the numbers are questioned as well. So Circular Economy publishes a annual report, the Global Circularity Gap Report, and it's a number, and it's a number that's derived from research, and it's been unwritten by, you know, for the right reasons and by the right parties. But still, when we drew the Circularity Gap Report for Norway, which was a lot worse than they had expected, obviously all the large industries in Norway were questioning the methods, were questioning the numbers, because there's not one standard across the board yet. And I think that is one of the biggest frog leaps that we can achieve as a category, to get to a consistent way of measuring circularity, where the numbers then cannot be you know, denied or can be questioned, because there's a common way of calculating the relevant KPIs and metrics.
Yeah, I don't want to take the subject over, just on that point of measurement. Look at the recycling industry, the way it managed or mismanaged recyclables going into China. There were no standards, there was no measurement. And what it got to in the end was China said, enough, there is no measurement, there's no standards, so we're not going to take those commodities. And suddenly a large part of the world's recycling was thrown on its head, because one large consumer of recyclable products basically shut its doors to outside imports. Now, once that's happened, everyone wants to come in and build standards and find ways of verifying it, because their markets disappeared. Literally overnight, their markets disappeared. So that force, you know, in that particular topic, but I totally agree with you, Yvonne, that you have to have the standards, they're believable, and people are comfortable working with them.
I think you also need to kind of highlight the level of dissatisfaction with the current system. I think if you kind of think of it as a change management process, as soon as you ask someone to change, the barriers go up. You know, even naturally, it's just human nature. We don't want to change what we're used to, what we're accustomed to. Yeah. And we paint this rosy picture of what we've got at the moment, that whether that's a relationship, a product, a business, etc. But I think when a circular business comes along, it can't just rely on the environmental benefit, or we're lower carbon, or do it for the environment. I think, as Martin says, you have to relate it to things that are important to that business and show, because I was on a webinar this week about an LED lighting company who's trying to develop a service offering around light as a service, rather than just selling the lights and walking away. So we're helping them go through the process of how you design that offering. And I was like, one of the big things is that everybody's starting this model assuming is that the current model is good. It's like the current model isn't good. How many times have clients been left dissatisfied with the current model? Focus on that you're solving their problems, not rather than change. You're kind of giving
I think that's a fundamental point here, isn't it? That we're in a process of transition, aren't we? So if we look at existing business models, it is about a product-centered service, isn't it? And what we're talking about is a service and an experience. So we're moving along to an experience-based economy, and actually circularity and a service is fundamental to that. And if you pick up your point, Alan, when you look at businesses that have moved to a service-centered economy, it's more profitable because what they're selling is a constant income stream rather than the lumpy income stream. So if I use your example, if you look at Philips, they now sell lighting as a service. Yeah. If you look at HVAC providers, they sell temperature as a service. If you look at Interface Flooring, which is well quoted in circularity, they sell flooring as a service. And actually, when they start to look at that, they're selling services on the back of their services. And I think that becomes really powerful. So Philips now sells circadian lighting on the back of their service to increase the productivity of the spaces they light. And I think that's a powerful place, isn't it? Yeah. You know, if you start to think about that experience economy and the service-centered economy, and circularity is fundamental to that. And if you take back those products into your supply chain and you repurpose them and reuse them, remake them, and you work out, you know, which is what people like Daikin and Train are doing, is when they're looking to provide temperature as a service, and they've got a number of buildings on a business park, do they provide one service for the 5 or 6 buildings on a business park, which is more efficient than putting HVAC solutions in each of those buildings?
That's a great
point. That's when it becomes a really powerful kind of issue.
That's a great point.
Silence.
No, I think that actually kind of leads. There's another question. I think that actually plays quite nicely into that. And the question is another attendee question. What is the reality of sustainable long-term business growth for B2B for circular economy? And I think that's started to touch on it there. You know, how do businesses grow, and how do we make it? Is it reality? Can we do this? How can we get there quicker? How can we make this happen?
I think Martin's point about the experience and incorporating service, I mean, as a business model, as you say, Martin, it takes away the variability of income. Everyone wants to get onto a consistent long-term revenue stream. Technology, the way that technology is built and then can be sold, supports that entirely. And then weaving the circular economy topics in there is probably a better way to deal with some of the barriers we were talking about, that, you know, people in traditional environments where this can be seen as a threat, well, you remove the barriers because they see the benefits. Let's say the benefits become more transparent and become more visible, and therefore there's a more of a preponderance to uptake them. And I think for B2B, that's the threat you've got. When it's a B2C decision, we're all consumers. We can jump onto that very simply when it's our own money. When it's a B2B experience and you're sitting in procurement, or you're sitting on a board with someone else's money, you've got shareholders, whatever, looking over, you are more careful, and the decisions are slower, and they are more guarded, and people are less willing to make them. But I think Martin, the reason it went quiet, Martin, because I'll tell you, I was really thinking about what you said. That was pretty profound, and it really makes you think when you describe it as a service in that way, particularly in B2B, that's potentially a big game changer. And you used some great examples there.
Yeah. The other thing I think to add to the mix, and I can't remember who said it in their introduction, was this whole issue about investability. I'm sure all of us have seen it, but if you haven't, the Mark Carney Reef lectures are well worth a watch, because Mark Carney, the ex-governor of the Bank of England, ex-governor of the Bank of Canada, and now the special envoy for the United Nations, basically makes it quite clear that if you're not thinking about ESG in terms of your business credentials, in terms of how you're performing and how you promote yourself, you won't get invested. So into the future, if those are fundamental cornerstones of your business strategy, don't be surprised that when it comes to being reinvested in as a business, that people might walk away from you. And I think that's another powerful driver. If that is the future that Mark describes, when you start to think about how am I going to make this work, actually that's going to be a massive driver. And I think COP26 this year, Mark Carney is chairing a working group on what does green finance mean in terms of driving change from a kind of sort of a policy perspective.
Yeah, I think it needs to become, we can't just reward those that are circular. We have to start to think about how do we punish those that are not. Punish is a kind of a light touch word, not capital punishment, but there is an element of it. We do need to disincentivize those who are in a linear model. The webinar I was on this week, they announced the linear economy is dead. That was the title. You know, it's from London, from Read London. You'll probably have heard of Wayne Hubbard speaking about it, that he wants to announce that the linear, if you're in a linear model, you're dying. So it's that kind of awareness that that model is going. And I think that it's always been this kind of, some of the biological reports that have come out that maybe Yvonne's referring to in the past about we're running out of stuff. We're running out of materials. We're running out of raw materials. I think we're now starting to reach that tipping point, and maybe David can add more about this, where certainly in the UK, Brexit, things like that are starting to affect security of supply. There's more materials being added to materials at risk lists. And I was talking to a company this week, trying to get them to think about a longer term circular model. Don't just put that product in the ground and say, yeah, it lasts 30 years, aren't we great? I was like, where are you going to get your product in 30 years? And you could see them suddenly thinking, yeah, but 30 years is a long time away. And then it's like, but it's not really. And when you think about your claims right now that it's a recycled product, the appetite for recycled materials is increasing. Do you know what I mean? More people with the plastic tax and things like that are coming in the UK are going to want a slice of that recycled material. So it's going to become more competitive to try and get a hold of that material. So you need to be thinking about security of supply, and you can't just assume that because you currently get it and it's readily available because it's recycled, that it will always be readily available. So I think that security of supply issue is hitting home like it's never hit home before.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you look across the world in terms of circularity best practice, if you look at what's going on in some countries, you can see they've had a light bulb moment around exactly what you're describing. So the Dutch is a really good example where if you're building a new building, you have to pair it with a building that's been demolished, because that building is a resource bank. And they're saying, we want to see 10, 20% of your new building using that existing building, because otherwise it's going to get wasted. And what's happened almost overnight is you're starting to see those percentages go up, because people are becoming more and more creative in terms of, well, I can crush the concrete and I can create a sub-base. I can use the architectural salvage in the new build. I can, you know, people are getting really clever, but it's about thinking it was sort of buildings as resource banks or products as resource banks, and reusing and repurposing and remaking, that effectively you get to the point where you are getting to perfect circularity, because things are just going around and around and around.
Yeah. Maybe a question I'll ask, we've got some consultants in here. You know, the trend 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever, was, okay, everyone starts producing in their annual reports a sustainability report. And is the future trend going to be, maybe alongside that sustainability report, a circularity report? Is that where you can see companies now wanting to not just internally demonstrate, but demonstrate externally how circular their businesses are, and that maybe I'm giving an idea for consultancies. How do you, if it's not being done, how do you move from, you know, the simple ESG type report, which I say is old hat in this respect, into something more that actually demonstrates some of the topics you're bringing up? How am I working towards where my raw materials are going to be in 20 years? How am I demonstrating to people like my kids, you know, when they're viewing a company, how circular is that business? And we're talking about a business which isn't an obvious circular economy business. So I'll throw that out. How do you guys see that?
If I can respond to that, John, what we see is that the cost of a product or a service currently isn't calculated taking into account what its impact is to the environment or to, you know, other themes. Once we start calculating the actual cost and you then move your business to a more circular business, your costs will drop.
Right.
And I think what, in the end, what people are wanting to report is impact. Even with all the circularity strategies that we're engaged with, whether it's a business, a city, or a nation, they want to report on impact, and circularity being a means to an end, and not necessarily the end that they want to report on, but the impact that they're actually achieving by going circular.
Right, right.
Can I throw a challenge back at you then, John? It's always good to, isn't it? I kind of see the world slightly differently, I suppose, because I think you're right. It does need to be reported, because that's about social pressure, stakeholder pressure, shareholder pressure to drive change.
Yeah.
But I suppose in my mind, when you were posing that question, I was thinking, okay, so what are the drivers for change? And I think a lot of it is also about policy and regulation. You know, the Netherlands example is a good example to use, but equally, it's about the procurement process, isn't it? And if I was trying to drive change in an organization at the moment, I would say, right, here is my product specification. This is what I want from you, be it a computer or be it a goods or whatever it might be. What can you do for me against that specification in the lowest impact way? So I'm going to have a procurement process that has two components. One is about the quality and the cost. And then three components. And my third component is, what's the impact of what you're providing me? And if you start to think about it in that way, you still have the same kind of cost and quality of the service you are asking for, but you're actually asking the supplier, demonstrate to me now that you are doing this in a way that is actually best for the environment, best for society in terms of driving that change.
Absolutely, Martin. I think the thing that you've got to have, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, you've got to have measurement of data down the supply chain so people can demonstrate that. And at the moment, in many areas, that's not as visible as it needs to be.
Yeah.
And until you've got that, you cannot ask those questions. Whether you're sitting as a CEO, you know, down through your senior management, or you're sitting there as a purchasing assistant somewhere in a company where you should be able to ask the same questions, and your suppliers should know those questions are coming,
yeah,
and be able to put that almost like a certificate of conformity. You know, and it works that way, but without the measurement and without the data and the knowledge, yeah, it's difficult to ask the questions. But I think that's the path that needs to happen.
I think you're right, John, in terms of it needs to be visible, because using the waste portal product that we've got as an example of that, if you go to build a building, how much waste you're going to produce, the cost of it is buried. And our costs, it's buried in preliminaries. You'll never know as a client. Now, if I turn around to you and say, John, I built you a building and I produced 300 tons of waste, you're going to go, was that good? Was that bad?
Yeah.
So the visibility of it, clients have to ask for it. They have to be prepared to stand up and say, my impact, as Martin says, my impact is this, and we need to measure our impacts. And there will be some impacts that will be more important than others. I don't think it's one issue, because a lot of people assume circularity means low carbon, but I've seen plenty of circular products that are higher carbon.
Higher carbon.
They're replacing. So there's an element of what is the most important thing. You need to measure it all, you need to lay it out bare, and then you make an informed decision based on what's important to you, which impacts do you want to influence. If you could take all of your waste and turn it into a new product that benefits you, but is still higher carbon, but reduces waste, gets rid of waste to landfill, creates new product lines, you might think that's a better thing to do, whereas the environmentalists would turn around and say, has to be all about carbon, you have to, everything should be low carbon, and you shouldn't do anything that's not, you know, so it's that kind of transparency is needed.
But that, if you take that argument, Alan, which is a really good one, that's where you start to see the business transformation taking place. So if you were building your building for John and he's gone great, you might then start to think about if one of John's criteria is low waste from the process of construction, you would then start to say, oh God, traditional means of construction are very wasteful. Therefore, do I actually go down a modern method of construction and build it in a factory so that effectively I can control that environment more and actually drive the process to meet John's criteria of a low waste kind of, you know, building that's still fit for purpose, but actually it's a much more controlled. And that's the transformation you need to see, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And that transformation, it came years ago with building construction in terms of the environmental impact. Everyone knows now you can design a building and
just as he was going to say.
We lost you there for a second, John.
You froze for a moment, just at the
right part.
Everyone knows.
I'm sorry, it's 85 degrees outside, so it's cooking the internet. I have to say, with the building design, all of the environmental factors, they're available and they're quoted and they go into the design. So adding a circularity component, a waste component, it's maybe not so far away. It's maybe not so far away, but today, yeah, you're quite right. If it creates 300 tons of waste or 400 or 1,000, you haven't got a benchmark to say what's good, bad, indifferent.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we built the website that we did, and we've collaborated with industry to get data sets, because to me, in my mind, we're doing something that the government should be doing. They should be producing benchmarks of, you don't get to build a new office building that produces above this threshold, because we know it can be done through alternative designs, etc. And we need to start ratcheting that down now. London are starting to consider that through certain planning statement requirements that above buildings that are above a certain size, that they're starting to introduce it. But that's one city, and it's like if you're building something the size of the Shard, then you have to do it. But you know, we need to kind of get this in the UK, certainly more like, how did Holland go from overnight, as you said, Martin, to that kind of massive change of priority? And it has to be driven, and certain clients are doing it, but we need to replicate those clients that are doing it already and make the clients who are not willing to be made aware of the impact of their building.
I think in some respects,
waste certificate on the wall of every building, personally.
It comes back to this thing, doesn't it, in terms of what's the relationship between regulation and best practice. And once you know the market can do better, how do you lift the regulatory floor? So effectively, I'm sorry, what you're doing is not acceptable anymore. And therefore we need to build it into building regs and build it into planning to say, I'm sorry, if you're delivering your building in this way, or delivering your service in this, or your product in this way, that's not acceptable anymore. And
that's where environmental assessment methods such as BREEAM and things like that they evolve over time, they get harder over time, but there's still a degree of certain credits are optional.
Yeah.
Which ones do you want to and that's where we need stronger. I don't know how we can stand up and say we're a circular nation, we're a circular city, we're a circular region, and then not have requirements on how we build that city, that region, that nation, and say you cannot build in that way. Some game-changing direction.
One of the interesting findings that we had when we spoke to cities is that they want to compare themselves to other cities. So we're also talking to Glasgow, Alan, but we spoke to someone and say, we would like a platform where we can actually see how we're doing compared to another city. are we lagging? Are we leading? Can we get inspiration from them? Can we get learnings from them? So they are really reaching across to see how they can draft policies and set benchmarks in their cities. And of course, no city wants to be last on on the leaderboard. So once we can actually map that and actually have that a visibility, I think they'll actually be competing to who's doing what, especially now Glasgow looking to host the first COP26. There's a tremendous amount of activity. Yes, might be postponed, I know, but there's a tremendous amount of drive now to make sure that Glasgow is doing well compared to other cities, and that's how a lot of cities are looking at it right now, to draft the policies to be circular, to be a leader. But the entire world still 8.6% circular, right, according to our report at least. So we've got a long way to go.
But just to put Alan's mind at rest, so I've been speaking to Cabinet Office this week about COP and G7, and Glasgow and Cabinet Office have decided that if it's a physical event, which I still think the blue zone will be physical, the green zone may not be, which is the exhibition versus the political, that Glasgow and Cabinet Office have decided that it will be the most sustainable event ever held. That's how they... No. If it's a physical event, they've decided that they're going to set policy frameworks for Glasgow and COP26 to drive and push the boundaries of sustainability.
Wow.
And it's a fascinating conversation because the UK government, I'm sure I should be saying this, but I will anyway. UK government, so don't.
Okay, it's not being recorded, Martin.
Okay, stop recording.
Don't put this in the note. What the government has said is, if we get it right at COP, we will create that framework for future events for all government events. So what does a sustainable event look like in a city? What are the parameters? And this comes back to lots of the conversations, I suppose. What things can we measure? What things can we manage? And what things can we drive change on? So what would a sustainable COP26 look like? No single-use plastics, integrated transport plans, all those kind of things. And so COP26 is going to be fascinating to see what Cabinet Office and UK government do with Glasgow in terms of actually setting down those parameters, because they're setting themselves that ambition.
Hope they're going to delay it then and give themselves time to come up with how they're going to do it.
They delayed it for a year already, haven't they? It was supposed to be last year. So
and they've not been that busy in the meantime, I don't think, preparing for it. So,
but they're, in that respect, they're talking about all the computers will be reused, repurposed computers. So no brand new computers. Let's reuse, recycle, all that kind of stuff. So some of the targets they're setting, you're thinking, do you know what? If you do that, it does demonstrate the possible. It's a slightly artificial environment because there's a lot of funding going into it, but it does set the benchmark.
For sure, yeah.
One thing I would also, sorry,
I was actually going to say, David, carry on. I noticed you come off mute a little while ago, so I wanted to make sure you got a chance to speak.
Yeah, no. So one thing I would mention as well is, like, from the touching on everyone's point here, is that, like, in principle, recycling and making materials from a product that's come from end of life versus extracting it from the ground in terms of mining or otherwise, the footprint of doing that is smaller, which actually translates into a lower cost as well. So, lead acid batteries today are recycled precisely because it's much easier to recycle the batteries and much cheaper to recycle batteries than it is to mine, the lead from scratch, et cetera. And you're going to see the same thing happening with lithium ion batteries, is that just fundamentally you're starting from a highly refined, beaten up material at the end of life. But when you recycle it, you're not having to take, a 0.5% lithium ore and throw away 95% of that ore rock to take out that one piece. You're taking something that's much more refined. So the cost of recycling fundamentally translates, to lower cost if it's if you're doing that. And then the other sort of component I would see to this as well is on the data front is every product that's delivered from one party to another, whether it's business to business or even business to consumer, you always have a spec sheet with it. Or I mean, if you're selling a computer, you've got like, okay, this much RAM, this much whatever. It should come with a LCA, a life cycle assessment stamp on it too, so that you got your carbon footprint associated with it, the water footprint, the land footprint that's used, et cetera. And it can't just be scope 1 and 2 emission type of LCA. It's got to be like a full, scope 3 kind of where you account for the supply chain of whatever that production step involved. And then the third thing I would say is like regulatory wise, it's actually really important. Like that's a really strong pillar towards initiating change from the status quo. Like, if you really want to fundamentally just shift something from the linear side to a more circular economy, there's not a lot of regulation that needs to happen. It's just like actually doing things like, mandating that a spec sheet comes with LCAs is one good point. The other good thing to tie in as well is that investors needed to be measured against not just the returns on investment, but on the carbon mitigation per $1 million invested. When investors are incentivized, either from a regulatory point of view, or it could also be voluntary as well. But if you've got a structure such that the accounting that people are measured against, or investment firms are measured against, including not just the dollar returns, but like the carbon returns, so to speak, you have ways of tweaking the entire ecosystem in such a way that everything becomes a circular economy. And I see all materials as being renewable. The only input that you need to continually source, externally is renewable energy, which ultimately comes from the sun. But at the end of the day, there's only so many lithium atoms or carbon atoms or iron atoms that you can play with, and we can entirely reuse everything, provided that we have the technology and knowledge to do so, but also the energy systems that continually leverage combination of geothermal, solar, wind, et cetera. Ultimately, all of which comes from the sun. But
yeah.
What question I was going to throw at you, David? I'm not sure I'm allowed to throw questions at people, but anyway, I'll do it.
I love questions.
The one thing I was thinking about is when I was looking at what I call sector jumps, I suppose, when you look at battery technology that's jumping from the automotive into the built environment, you're starting to see Tesla batteries going from cars into kind of domestic properties. But the bit that I was fascinated, and I still haven't kind of worked out in my head, I suppose, is the fact that they're over-engineered, because obviously for a car, weight is a big issue. But when you start to put things into the built environment, weight is no longer an issue. You can put it in the back of your garage. And actually the use of those precious materials is less relevant, because you could end up having a bigger battery using more sustainable, more natural materials that will be easier to maintain by the consumer. And I kind of think sometimes that we've been driven by technology, not on need or the use of that product. And therefore, sometimes we're using up more resources when sometimes we don't need to, because, the amount of space you got in your back of your garage or in your loft or wherever you put in your battery to take your renewable sources is actually a lot bigger than would be in the boot of a car or the floor plate of a car.
Right. So, so a couple of points there, actually. You're exactly right. The product criteria for a battery in a vehicle is different than the needs for what you would need in a building or for grid scale storage. For grid scale storage, the most important factors are cost and durability or longevity. Efficiency is part of that, but at the end of the day, it's like the cost to build, the cost to operate, and how long it lasts. Versus in a vehicle, weight matters, volume matters. So so from that perspective, I actually see the stationary storage market eventually not being lithium-ion battery based. But for the short, well, so there's actually two things. One is, I mean, this gets kind of nuanced, but with lithium-ion batteries, they're very good for power applications, meaning that if you want to load shift or you know, the duration of the battery charging and discharging, it works well for like a 4-hour cycle. So if you want to load shift 1 hour, it's good. 2 hours, 3 hours, it's good. But once you start to get 4 hours or longer, lithium-ion batteries are just not a suitable technology for that. So you want to find something else. And at that point, a better technology would be something that is really dirt cheap to manufacture, where you don't use lithium and nickel and cobalt and stuff like that, but you use, like, I don't know, I mean, it could be all sorts of materials, or even, you know, totally different applications. And then at that point, it's how can you load shift over a day or a week? And when you assemble that and operate it, you want to make sure, yeah, that you're not using expensive or let's just say higher cost lithium. You should be using, I don't know, it could be a sodium sulfur battery or something like that. So so totally agree with that.
Yeah.
The other thing to mention as well is that if there's enough electric vehicles out there plugged into the grid, then utility companies should be smart enough to figure out how to utilize the batteries in such a way that, like, you know, every consumer has a contract with the utility to say wherever they plug in their vehicle, the utility is allowed to use maybe 10% of that battery while it's charging. And to use that for load shifting or frequency regulation, yeah, you know, so that you use a little bit of that battery while the owner of the vehicle is not using it.
But if you take that argument, it isn't the utility company anymore. Maybe it's the car company that becomes the utility company, because effectively they have the power, and effectively you are
the data.
Yeah, exactly. So actually you almost see that car companies might actually become a threat to utility companies because they control the power, they own the power, they can come into a lease agreement with the consumer, which would drive that change.
This right. is Elon's master plan with all the Bitcoin he's been buying.
Exactly.
That's right. That's right.
With a huge footprint.
Yeah. I just like to touch back on the question which is burning with me about how to move this, how much regulation against getting companies to want to move themselves without having to have top-heavy legislation. I think one thing that is important, particularly where I sit these days, is the belief that people have got to see consistency in years going forward in approach from government. And one example that comes to mind, maybe to illustrate that from my side, is on recyclable plastics, the use of recycled plastics. In getting the marketplace up for paper, we also looked at plastics and talked to quite a lot of experts in the field of recycled plastics here in the US. And it intrigued me, one of the big pressures in terms of use of recycled plastic against producing fresh plastic has been the impact of shale gas here in the US. So the huge increase in availability of shale gas, and obviously the cost of that has fallen all the way from down in Texas all the way up to the Northeast, up the Appalachian basins of shale gas there are, is it's putting a lot of pressure against using recycled plastic. So where does government step in? And obviously with the previous occupants of the White House, this was never going to feature on his radar. You know, it's all about supporting the fossil fuel industry. But now we've got someone in there that is basically flipped almost 180 degrees, including what he's announced this morning. You know, suddenly US is going to cut 50% of its emissions, you know, within less than 10 years. Could you have seen that happening a year ago? And my point is, you can't have this flip-flop. And that's where I go to government setting guidelines. I think someone mentioned it earlier, minimum standards, like having the product standard, the product info sheet, or whatever you want to call it, and that becomes, rather than huge heavy legislation to push this, there's got to be that balance, because if it's too much at the extremes either way, no one's going to follow. Business people will not make long-term decisions on investment for fear of policy flip-flops from one government, one president, whatever, to the next. And I think for me, with where I look at the use of renewables, particularly on the recycling side, I think the government has got to make a standard to say, we will aim to use X% of recyclable plastic. And then industry, go and work out how you're going to do that. Work out how you're going to do it, how you're going to make a business out of it, how you're going to be profitable with it, that you can meet our standards, because no one is going to come in and say, you are not allowed to use shale gas to make fresh plastic. I'm using maybe bad examples, but no one is going to work with legislation like that. And I think that balance of regulation against companies wanting to step up and be more circular, there's a very fine line that's got to be, a very fine line that's got to be taken there between the two extremes, if you are really going to get people to want to make the step up. Any views on that?
Is it a little bit more than that, though? So I completely agree with everything you said, but the way I think the market dynamics work is you need to create certainty. So that's about your destination, your target. It's about the regulatory floor in terms of who wants to be market leaders, but equally it's about the economics here, isn't it?
Yes.
And what you might decide to do if you were in the White House or in number 10 or wherever you might be as a policymaker is to say, I appreciate in any process of market transformation, the start of it might need economic incentives.
Yes.
So as we start to make a policy shift, what we will do is we will artificially support the market for a number of years to allow you to invest and to innovate. But we will take away those marketplace incentives when the market can stand on its own feet. But you're right, it's about how do I have that certainty? Because if you, to use your phrase, flip-flop around, is it worthwhile investing? Is it worthwhile training up my staff? Is it worthwhile, researching what I need to do here because it's going to change in a couple of years' time? Yep. You almost need concrete, agreed international targets that basically drive that process of change, because we are an international economy these days. We do trade around the world. Yep. How do you get world leaders to agree on those targets in a consistent way, agree on fiscal, financial measure to support, but you do it in a way that is outcome focused. So you don't describe necessarily all the processes, you describe the outcome you're trying to achieve. We want to get to a net zero world by, how are you going to get there? And we are going to look at raising the floor on a number of regulatory areas, such as building regulations in terms of refurbishment or whatever it might be, to achieve that net zero target. And we will stick with it. And it needs to be cross-party agreement that will be maintained. So when the politics and the colours of governments change around the world, it's a kind of it's agreed that these targets, whatever they are, will be maintained.
Yeah.
A good example of that.
Don't we have those high level agreements in place with the Paris Climate Agreement, with the Sustainable Development Goals? Don't we have those high level targets set, and that do we need other policies in place to force this change where the resources are finite? Yes.
But I think the bit, a boring person I am, so I was doing a bit of work last night, and I went to the UK Climate Change Committee report in terms of the carbon budget, and was looking at what progress has been made to try and work out who's doing what. And it was quite fascinating because when you start to look, and it's not just the UK government, you can apply this to any governments across the world, various commitments, and this plays very well to John's point, various governments have made commitments, we will do this, but have then not identified the pathway to achieve it.
Yeah.
So they've gone, you need to be, agriculture needs to be driving effective land use management to become, to capture carbon in terms of land management practices. That's one of the climate change commitments. You go and speak to the agriculture sector, nobody's actually identified how they're going to do it. So this is kind of hanging action that, so how are we going to make that work? And I think this is the
is that where the gap is at? So there's the high level outcomes that are, the desired outcomes, they're there. And then there's huge gap. And then there's the people that actually have to realize the change and deliver on the results. And it's the how do I even get started? How do I do this? That's where I feel technology can play a huge role to actually help and scale that to actually accelerate the transition.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if it's a business, that's the way you run a business. You have the target, and then it's broken down into the pieces. The elephant is broken down, and how do we achieve it? And that's where technology comes in. But in terms of policy, consistency on policy, as you said, Martin, that's key. No matter who is in power, there's consistency on policy, and then breaking that down into manageable targets with clear responsibility. And when you do that, companies, and we'll go back to where we maybe started, companies will start to say, okay, I need to start thinking about circularity, and I need to include it in my business strategy, and I need to have a plan for it, and it needs to become part of the way my business runs, not just I'm checking a box to meet some regulation. I think that for me is a big part. Move away from checking the box to, no, we actually own this because it's a better way of doing things.
So going back to your point, Yvonne, yes, we've got the targets. Yes, we've got the ability to innovate, but I don't think we've got the pathway which tells us the whole, which is how do I get from the targets to ensure that I can deliver the outcomes in a way that gives me certainty.
And why, as a business, should I? Because the government are saying this is where we want to get to, and obviously, from a socially good perspective, the business says yes, I agree. But then like Alan was talking about earlier, that at the moment there's no incentive and there's no consequence. So they're sitting there thinking, I want to get there. I kind of, I've got some ideas, but actually my business is working really well and it's really profitable at the moment. So where's the drive, apart from there being a 2030 goal? What's the government giving me, or what additional advice, support are they putting in place, or consequence to say, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. If you do, this will happen.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting example with the single-use plastic ban that came in across the UK and in Europe on certain products, straws stirrers being an example. I haven't seen a single press release from the plastic manufacturing straw industry to kind of turn around and go, hang on, you've just totally torpedoed our business sector here, because there was just unilateral, this has to stop. We're banning this product. And I think so it kind of touches on the flip-flop bit of politics, but the circular economy, there will be casualties. Do you know what I mean? Certain industries, certain companies, we can't keep everyone happy. And I think that's where the change from the status quo has to be realised. And if you don't realise it, something like that could come along and end you overnight. I think that's where businesses need to kind of not just read the political landscape, what way is it going to go, but for me, in the last 20 years, everything has went from being a nice to have, fluffy tree huggery subject to carbon budgets, UK carbon budgets, 78% reduction, 50% reduction in 10 years. That clock ticking, and I think that kind of strategy question is going to become not a long-term strategy question very soon. And I think that's going to be very interesting for a lot of businesses to just suddenly wake up and go, it's tomorrow, that kind of impact.
But it's quite quite a complex change management equation, because again, we come back to something we've touched on at the start, the education. The generations that are coming through now have this as part of their DNA, as someone mentioned earlier. It's in there, they want it. So there will be an accelerant into the change process by the younger generation coming through, because this is so important to them. The question over plastic straws and single-use plastic bags, to them it's a no-brainer. It's not an impact. It's not there's a casualty. It's a, why were we doing this in the first place? And I think when you've got that drive coming through, and as more and more of these this generation moves into industry and start having more impact on the decision making of industry, that is going to accelerate. And the question I think that on everyone's minds at the moment is, how quickly will it accelerate, and is it fast enough because of all the climate change issues? And I don't want to mix climate change and circularity here, but there is a certain overlap when you get to doing this. But when you've got powers like that coming in, things can happen and will happen a lot faster. I just look again at the use of tech in recycling, and some of the companies that are now coming in on clean tech with some fantastic ideas in terms of hardware, as well as software, as well as use of AI, analytics and everything. And the founders are in the 20s. I kind of feel quite old, but they're coming in and they've got a business modeled exactly with what we're talking about here from the get-go. You almost get the impression it was never in their minds to create a business in any other way. And that should give us all hope for speed, and you know, and I think that's an important part of what will happen, that there will be there's a flywheel effect starting to come in, and the flywheel is starting to pick up speed, and once it gets going, there will be no going back.
I think we need to give a bigger platform for those startups. I think we do work with startups and existing companies, and startups are always quite easy. You're not having to change the mindset, as you say, John. They're already bought in to that. The hardest bit is getting them to think like business people sometimes. But the hard part, and which I think it touches on the procurement question previously, is how do we get those existing companies, the ones that are already locked in, that have 60 years history, that, you know, they've always done it that way, and they claim to innovate each year, but ultimately it's still a linear model. How do we accelerate that transition? Because that's the difference between I think someone said, it's the difference between catwalk and high street. You know, we see catwalk examples of what can be done, and they're great, they're sexy, they're pilots. I also heard a great quote from someone in Wales who turned around and said, "We have more pilots in Wales than the RAF." That was a great thing, because he said we don't need more pilots, we need mainstream. And I think it's how do we transition startups into mainstream, and you don't just by getting more startups, you have to convert the existing players. And I think that's how do we bring them on that journey. And I think procurement is the kind of a silver bullet. If it can evolve, then we've got a chance.
Actually, the kind of one of the last questions that was sent in that we haven't discussed is it's probably a really nice follow on from that, and kind of leads us nicely into the last 10 minutes of the event, and that was, how do we promote circular economy success stories? And I think that follows on from that. You know, how do we get it out there? Look, this works. This is amazing. It saves money. It's really, you know, it's great for sustainability. You know, what platforms can we use to promote that? How can you know, we as a group, but also the wider group, you know, how can we get those out there and let governments know, and, you know, everything like that?
Well, I'd love to hear about the stories, because we actually, as Circular Economy, we have a knowledge hub where there's about 1,500 use cases now that are being read actively by the circular community globally, and we're hoping that would be a go-to source for anyone, anything circular to share, but also to consume the content that's on there. And we're looking at making that one of the the centerpieces for all of our campaigns and communications, to make sure that you can find inspiration there, can find knowledge there, and be able to look at success stories, but also learnings, not just the success stories, but the learnings that people go through while they're transitioning, so that other people can actually leverage that as well.
Absolutely. No, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I think that's it. But it's the education piece as well, isn't it? Like, how do we get the UK government looking at something like that, and really kind of taking it in and digesting it, and then giving that advice back out when they're looking at how they're funding startups and who they're partnering with to put their funds. How this is, this, I just don't hear this being at the forefront of how they make those kind of decisions. And I think that's, again, I think probably more needs to be done from the governments, because they have a lot of funding for startups, but how are they choosing to, and where are they choosing to put that money?
Right.
I think we need to put a different audience in charge of this, and it's an audience that doesn't get mentioned. And for me, the audience is marketing. You put the head of Nike marketing in charge of climate change, in charge of net zero, and I bet you they will make an impact. And I'm doing myself out of a job here, because I don't think it's environmentalists and people like me that need to be talking about this. I think it needs to be sold. If you look at the impact of the Blue Planet Effect documentary series, that overnight changed views of consumers. You've got Netflix putting on documentaries.
Seaspiracy, yeah.
Seaspiracy, whether you agree with every stat in it or not, etc. But it's powerful. It's being sold, and I think this is where John's daughters and my children, when they grow up, will start to consume it in a way that it's been sold to them. Whereas, as when I was growing up, it was never sold. And I think we need to sell the level of dissatisfaction with the current system, the level of opportunity that a new way of doing things offers for businesses. It's not just we want to bash the guys being bad. We need to lift up the people that are given those alternative options, so that it's not the same case studies reeled out time and time again. It's new case studies, it's fresh case studies. I want to see dozens, and it's like, oh, hey, I've seen another company that does that and another company that does that, because it shows that there's a market for it. It's not just, oh, I can name one company that does an example in each sector.
Like Patagonia gets repeated everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I know I'll skip it in the chat, but IKEA have suddenly jumped into the mix.
Yeah.
Someone who 3 years ago weren't in the equation. But I think that's good. But I don't want to see IKEA for the next 10 years. I want to see who's next. I think marketing have to be part of this. We have to figure out how we sell it. We are consumers.
But this is, I think, about linking things together, isn't it? So if we kind of think about our conversation today, there needs to be almost the framework of how it all cements together, doesn't it? So what does this mean in terms of the relationship between an organization and their customers? So what's the social capital, and how do you make sure that you are driving this agenda on transparency? So how do you make sure that relation exists? How do you make sure you're thinking about the human capital? So if you're attracting talent for the future, how do you demonstrate to your staff, current and future, that you are making sure that you are doing the right thing? Because if you're not, you may have problems recruiting people in the future because your ethics are wrong. How do you make sure that your natural capital, how do you make sure that you are always improving in terms of reducing the impact you have on the environment? So as you think about your product, how do you year on year make sure your impact is less? In that process, how do you make sure that you are developing new IP? So how are you making sure your intellectual capital is always increasing in terms of innovating, thinking about new partnerships, thinking about new relationships? And then how do you make sure that your financial capital, going back to where we started, I suppose, how do you make sure that your ESG criteria are investable because your risk profile is low, because you're not actually accessing diminishing resources. You're always thinking about how you invest in your staff, you're innovating, and therefore investors will come to you because you are thinking about the future, not about the past.
And ultimately, if your bottom line improves as a result of this,
yep,
it becomes a no-brainer.
And it comes back to that definition of what is a sustainable business. It's one that's commercially successful, that's improving the environment. So you almost argue it's regenerative kind of sort of environmental concerns, and is having a positive impact on social value. Get that right. And I think quite a lot of people, when they talk about sustainable businesses, forget that they need to be commercially sort of successful.
Yeah, yeah.
Those are almost the criteria, Martin, almost the criteria of the B Corp, right? The B Corp certification. So, you know, a sustainable business is not just being good for the environment, but you're also a business still.
So it's interesting because we're doing a bit of work at the moment on writing an open standard, a PAS, on purpose-led business. So what does a business of the future look like, which is designed around purpose-led outcomes? Because when you start to look at B Corp, there are a number of criteria that are imposed upon you. And should you actually have a way of driving your business that basically works in an inclusive way, not an exclusive way? And what is fascinating is when you start to talk to the water companies and the energy companies, they see their future around, you know, regenerative environmental outcomes. And the water companies are ones which are blowing my mind at the moment when we're writing this standard. Because they're saying, well, if we get this right, we can actually improve the environment because we can create wetland areas, we can create reservoirs for recreation, and we can supply an increasing population with water. So our purpose-led business for the future is about making sure we make the right decisions about our capital investment, as well as understanding what the needs of society are. We don't think in the future we will have shareholders in terms of paying money to shareholders. We think our shareholders will be society. When you start to get your head around that, you go, wow,
For sure, yeah.
That's a bit mind-blowing, but that's where they're going. You know, that's where water companies and energy companies are thinking. We will be purpose-led businesses for the future. We still need to be profitable, but we'll be measuring our success on what do we give back to society in terms of, you know,
rather than dividend to stakeholders.
And that's just mind-blowing. I would never thought I'd have that conversation, you know, a few years back. But you sit in these meetings sometimes thinking, God, that's just
big.
Blowing my mind.
That's big. Tell you what, Kay, your three marketeers across the bottom who are invisible have got an awesome white paper out of this.
Honestly, I was just thinking exactly the same thing. This is going to be great, and I've actually been sent some really good content by Yvonne and Oscar separately. So what I'm going to do, yes, we have. Can you see them? Yes, we have. That's my marketing. So yeah, I'm gonna wrap this up now. But it's been amazing. I've genuinely thoroughly enjoyed every second of it. I'll follow up with an email with all of your LinkedIn details. So if you want to connect and you want to carry on conversations, then that's what this is all about, building your network. And then in about 2 weeks' time, we'll follow up with the white paper. And yeah, you can all read that at your leisure. And obviously, I'll follow up with you all individually at some point to see how you're all getting on. But thank you so much for attending. I've genuinely really enjoyed it.
Thanks for organizing, Kate.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot.
No
nice
problem
meeting
at all.
everyone. Stay in touch.
Take care. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care.